Hi, we want to thank you all for joining us. I know that this time seems to be challenging, and so Rochelle and I plan to follow up with a doodle poll in the future to make sure that we can find a time that works for more of our speakers as well as participants. And so we want to thank you all for joining us, both right now as well as in the future. I think we have a couple of people who might enter the room as their clients drop off this evening as well. So a little bit just as background, Rochelle and I are the co-chairs of the Women's SIG, and this idea for these presentation, the speaker series, started out of a conversation that we had at the AGPA Connect Women's SIG Luncheon this year, where we were able to start talking about the barriers that women have faced of marketing their practices, being able to have groups that thrive, being able to get themselves their professional placement that they deserve in the field. And so we wanted to spotlight some of the women who have paved the path for the rest of us, who have been trailblazers in the field. And so it is our immense honor to welcome Dr. Ann Steiner today. And Rochelle is going to introduce her further.
Thank you, Carmen, and to all of our guests that are with us, and to those of you who will be joining us later on and watching by video, welcome. So tonight we are delighted to welcome to our speaker series, Dr. Ann Steiner, PhD, MFT, CGP, FAGPA. She is passionate about group work. She's an internationally known author, consultant to therapists, lecturer, and workshop presenter. Dr. Steiner served as an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry at UCSF for 14 years. She's an AGPA fellow, former AGPA board member. She serves as a co-chair for the Health and Medical SIG for 9 years, and currently serves as a member of AGPA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. She served as a board member of the Northern California National Speakers Association, and still serves as a board member of the International Human Learning Resources Network. Dr. Steiner is a founding member and faculty member of the Psychotherapy Institute's group therapy training program in Berkeley, California. She pioneered the creation of the therapist's professional will and has published over 20 articles on the subject, and authored 2 books with Routledge, Help Your Group Thrive, a workbook and planning guide for the general public, and the 3rd edition of How to Create and Sustain Groups That Thrive, a therapist workbook and planning guide. Dr. Steiner has taught 19 6-hour law ethics workshops about the therapist's professional will, and is a popular AGPA presenter about the nuts and bolts of groups that thrive. To read more about the therapist's professional will or learn more about Dr. Steiner's downloadable therapist professional will, guidelines for managing planned and unplanned absence, check out her therapist website with the link we'll drop there in the chat. Currently, Dr. Steiner is writing a manual titled Your Therapist's Professional Will, the ethical care of your practice and yourself, a workbook and guide, and she's eager to get back to completing her self-help book, The Roller Coaster of Chronic Illness, How to Add Joy to the Ride. She leads 3 online groups in the San Francisco Bay Area. This should explain why I started our bio of her tonight by saying she is passionate about group work. Dr. Steiner, we are delighted to have you. What great accomplishments. So I'd like to start off by seeing if you might share with us about your journey and aspects that might address the issue of women under-marketing themselves.
So first, thank you so much for having me speak tonight. This is really quite an honor, and I'm thrilled to see what the 2 of you are doing with the SIG. It's quite exciting, and it's exciting to be part of it. So thank you for having me be here this evening. And I also wanted to sort of introduce myself from the perspective of that I use the pronouns of she, her, and hers. And also to say that I live on the unceded territory of the Yakut and the Miwok Indians in California. And I had put up in the link some websites for people to check out if you're not familiar with the issue, not the issue, but the way of introducing ourselves and acknowledging that we're living on stolen territory, basically, and acknowledging who the ancestors are that originated in this area that have been moved aside. So one of the things I was thinking about in terms of this presentation was I was thinking this is sort of an up close and personal informal conversation. And some of the things I'm going to be sharing, I haven't really even shared with colleagues. But it occurred to me it might be useful to share a personal story about how I came to be more of a writer, and how that one place where I got tripped up. And so those of you that are in Northern California know that the Group Therapy Society here has a conference every year at Asilomar. And I grew up kind of in AGPA and the affiliate because my father was active in AGPA, and I knew Marcia from when I was a teenager and worked at AGPA as a volunteer. So I kind of grew up in this world in a lot of different ways. And so every year of my life, I go to Asilomar pretty much, most years. And that's where we have our conferences. It's on the ocean. So when we come back into person, we welcome people from out of state to come to the conference. And it's a beautiful setting. It's a state park and a state beach. It's gorgeous. So I was on the board, and we were having a board meeting, and the first edition of one of my books had just come out. And I was feeling kind of sheepish about sharing it with people. And I literally went to this meeting, and it was cold out, and I was wearing a raincoat, and I literally had the book tucked under my jacket, hiding it. And then I sat down at this table, and I sat down next to somebody that I have considered a friend. And I said, I want to show you something. I was so excited. And I pulled it out secretly and showed it to her. And her response was, how nice. And then turned to talk about something else. And I learned something very powerful that day. And that is that not everybody is great at celebrating everybody. And that the ways in which women compete with each other are subtle and can be damaging. So it took me a while to sort of move past that. By the end of the conference, people were asking me for the book. Okay, and then I was like out about the book. But it was one of those unusual experiences that I didn't expect, and because there's the world of writers and there's a world of therapists, and they're quite different in terms of encouraging each other. But one of the things I love about your SIG is, and also, to be honest, are the health and medical issues SIG too, there's a lot of support, right? And collaboration. So if I start with anything today, it's going to be the key to success with marketing is collaboration and supporting each other, because that's just the way to go, and it works. And another example of that is that often people, when I do consultation, one of the first things I'll say is, take a stranger to lunch. When I had a practice in San Francisco for about 15 years, it was a full practice. I never had to market. And then I moved where I could buy a home out in sort of the rural area, more rural, and I didn't know a soul. So I had to start doing what they call marketing, which was, in my world, that's an anathema. And this is, I've got my degree in like 81 or something like that. So I'm not a spring chicken that way. Marketing, you just don't do. That's a dirty word. So I didn't know anybody that had taken out a Yellow Page ad, for example. Okay. So what I did when I moved to this new town and knew nobody was I came up with a policy of take a strange therapist to lunch. They didn't have to be strange, but they just had to be different, right? And I would just do that once a month as a way of getting to know the community and to ask them about their practice so I could refer to them and they could refer to me and begin to get to know that world. And I made the mistake one time because I didn't realize how big a bubble I had been living in the city, of when I took one of these therapists out, of saying, so can you tell me a little bit about this town, Vallejo, that I've moved to? And I said, is it a gun-toting town? Because I grew up, I didn't know any therapists that believed that in gun rights or, had different political beliefs for me. I just was Bubble City, right? And his response, he looked sort of puzzled and he said, well, I'm not sure I know what you mean, but I go hunting quite a lot with my family and stuff. And I went, oh, foot in mouth. I tried to extract my foot. But, it's these assumptions that we make when we move to different communities and are trying to start a practice and build up our practices. So for me personally, writing has always been a passion. It's something I just did journaling all through my childhood as a way of coping. That's, I would write and I would deal with that. And I wrote poetry, but it was all just for personal consumption. And then I got really interested in groups, and I did my pre and postdoc fellowship at a very, very analytic institute where I literally again hid that I liked groups. And I was co-leading a group with a psychiatrist, but I kept it secret because it was really looked down upon in that world. It was not understood. It was like doing family therapy. It's really radical stuff, right? So learning how to, sort of begin to let yourself be seen is part of it in terms of what your strengths are, and owning them has been part of my journey. So about 20 years ago, I got interested in doing more writing and taking it more seriously. And I joined the California Writers Club. For those of you that are interested in writing, there are writers clubs all over, and they have speakers who are published who speak, and it's a wonderful way to begin to get into that world. So I went to that and I became a member. I got active in it. And one day there was an announcement on one of the listservs that there was a publisher who was looking for stories from women that have overcome obstacles. Now, some of you will know and some of you won't, that when I was president of Northern California Group Psychotherapy Association, I was in an electric wheelchair for my arthritis. And I used it for distances. And at the time, I had a sign on the back. This is at a Sillamar. I'm trooping around this state beach in my electric chair, right? And I had a sign on the back that said Wheels of Liberation, because I got tired of people feeling bad for me and making, sympathy sounds. Because for me, it was like the wheelchair was a liberating thing. I could do more. I could go to the beach. I could go to the store. Before that, I'd had a couple of years where it was just work and bed rest. And so this was for me a good thing. So I mentioned that because I was, looking at all of that stuff and then trying to figure out, how I could try and do more teaching. And then I got really interested in writing. So I went to the California Writers Club. There's this posting looking for women that have overcome obstacles. A couple of friends of mine said, you really should put in for that. And I was like, you gotta be nuts. So I went ahead and I took a risk, probably one of the bigger ones I did. And I submitted for it. I just told my little story. And it turns out I was selected as one of like 29 women from across the country who had overcome obstacles. And they flew a camera person out, they flew the interviewer out, and there was an entire day here in my garden with this whole thing. And then it turns out it's this amazing, I don't know if you can see it, it's a coffee table book. And it's got all these wonderful inspirational stories, including Sonia Sotomayor. And so I didn't know any of the women, but they had a launch in Tucson. So I went to the launch. I'm like, oh, this I got to go to. So I went to the launch and I met one of the women who is blind and travels all over the world doing professional speaking. Got to know her. I said, so how did you get your book published? And she said, well, the main thing you have to do is you have to have more of a national platform. And you need to join the National Speakers Association if you really are serious about getting published, which at that time meant doing 24 paid speaking engagements. That's a lot in 1 year. And you can do some at what they call the animal circuit, which is the Rotary and the Lions and the Elks. And you can do that for low fee. And there are ways to do it, but they have to be paid speaking engagements in order to do that. And the National Speakers Association is this very conservative organization that is largely heavily marketing. So there's slick marketers, and then there's some interesting people. Kind of like everywhere you go, there are going to be some interesting people that are like-minded. And so I've learned all this weird stuff about marketing from the National Speakers Association. And it did, in fact, help me get the contract that I eventually got for my other book. So part of my message is, if you see an opportunity that looks scary, but you think maybe you would be interested in doing it, I really want to encourage you. Hi, Karen, good to see you. I really want to encourage you to take those leaps of faith, because when I look back on this, every time I've taken a leap of faith, it has paid off. So one of my first leaps of faith was getting in the wheelchair. I didn't want to use a wheelchair. I thought, oh, that'd be terrible if people saw me in the wheelchair. What if my patients saw me in a wheelchair? How could they ever trust me? And I was fortunate, I was a good therapist at the time, and he was like really clear, that's your projection, and then I'd be able to, got a little more comfortable with being freer using the wheelchair. So it's sort of, that was a leap of faith, and the same with doing that article. And then that led me to, being asked to do articles. So each little thing leads to another. And another thing along those lines, if you want to get more well-known outside of your particular vicinity, is to, if you find an author you really like, or there's an article you really like, you probably have the same assumption most people do. Oh, that person is so busy, they're not going to want to hear from me. But you would be surprised at how touched people are, no matter who they are, to get an email saying, I read your book, it really, I had this reaction to it, I really appreciated it. And it can lead to feeling like you're more connected in that part of the world. So that's one thing that I would suggest that you consider. And, I used to be really judgmental about the phrase inspirational speaker. And then I learned to realize that, what, there are people who are inspirational, and that's a good thing. And I don't have to look down my nose at it and say, oh, that's unprofessional. Because, in our professions, if you think about it in graduate school, what were you taught about marketing? Who were the people that marketed, right? And for most of us, there was nothing taught about it. And about 2 years ago at AGPA, the person who was going to teach the workshop on money had to cancel. So I was asked at the last minute to substitute. And I did a deep dive into doing that, because money's been something I always teach about as part of my workshops. And so I did a super deep dive around money. And then this whole thing about money and fees and women, and how much harder a time we have in raising our fees. Should I jump to that now? That's another piece that that I think is valuable for people in private practice, is that we tend to really undersell ourselves and undervalue ourselves. So if you think about, okay, who are the people you respect and what are they charging? And are you near their qualifications? Then what's getting in the way? And then what's going on that we downplay our strengths? Are we just being nice girls when we do that, so that we'll be accepted? What is it about? And in the handout that I put together a couple of free write prompts for you to think about in terms of where you are in your own personal marketing. Another aspect of that, I'm gonna hold on, feel free to bring me back, Carmen, to when I jump too much, or anybody else, is websites. Most of us have websites now, right? And if you don't, and you're thinking of going into private practice, I know some people are like in the college counseling SIG, so that they feel they don't need to do that. But I'm going to encourage you to get your own website, to have a LinkedIn page. You don't have to put much on it. Just have a LinkedIn presence that you can update with your accomplishments, and have people write recommendations and things like on it for if and when in the future you might want to do something interesting that's different than what you're doing. And I don't mean to imply that college counseling is not interesting, but do something that's outside of what you're accustomed to doing if you're in an agency or something like that, so that you build up your visibility. And then you begin to feel like, okay, you can market yourself, And for most of us, we got this stigma that marketing means selling yourself. And there's a big difference between selling yourself and selling what you have to offer. And if we can get that leap, that visibility is important, and it's not just for narcissists, it's for anybody who has something they want others to be able to benefit from. And to be able to, take your place on the leadership platform. So when we think about fees, if I go back to that for a minute so I don't lose it, most of us start out believing that we need to do sliding scale and feeling passionate about making our therapy affordable. And then the real world hits after a while and we realize we need to bring in more money. So one way to manage that is to have almost a quota system of, I have 3 hours a week that I do pro bono or sliding scale, and then the rest of it is my full fee. So that you can, for me, it makes me feel less guilty having, seeing people that are full fee is doing that. And more with what's going on with what I call mangled care, is that people can't afford to accept managed care fees. And they set it up so that it works for when you're newly licensed and it's low fee. And it makes it really hard for people to be able to support themselves. And just like, even if you're single, it doesn't matter. We encourage our patients to go and assert themselves for a raise. So one of my mentors talks about what he did early on is every year he raised his fees just as a policy. And if you do that early on, it makes it so much easier, because raising fees later is harder. If they know that every year there's going to be a $10 increase, or whatever you think is reasonable, but it's an increase and it could be the cost of living. That's one way that some people do it. And then a lot of us use sliding scale, and we're all group therapists, and that complicates the group a lot. But my bias is that no secrets in group. And so we want, the way I do it is the group fees sliding down and up get talked about in group. And so there's that stuff, and doing workshops. AGPA, they have the open sessions designed to bring new people in and to help mentor people walk through and get through that. And they're getting better at doing it in a more accessible way, so that the DEI task force is looking at ways to try and make the organization less elitist and exclusive. Is there a question? No? Okay. So the other question is, do you hide your light? And that's kind of what we're about today, is that question of hiding your light as a therapist, and what your contributions are to the field. When you have a contribution, do you share it with people? Or do you is bragging bad? And I meant to look up the word bragging, but we all need people where we can brag and complain, bitch and moan and brag. We need safe places to do that. So if we look at the different ways of looking at this, why women have trouble with these issues, what each of us need to let go of to be more satisfied with our work, to get higher fees when it's appropriate. And here's a quote from James Cook. I should have tried to find a quote from a woman, I apologize. But do just once what others say you can't do, and you will never pay attention to their limitations again. Did you catch that? To their limitations, right? So the limitations are in others' expectations. And I like that in terms of what it says. And then looking at what's a limiting belief, right? So limiting beliefs those are just the rules for how life works. Women can't, or unmarried women can't, or queer women can't, or all the different maybes, right? Just can't do that. And then instead of that, we adopt those to survive, like silence. Okay, there are times it's wiser and safer to be silent. We all know that. But there may be a time when we adopt them and they do help. Has it helped? Is the bottom line. And then there's marketing. If we just think about that. So my top 3 tips on marketing is interest. The best thing I got out of being on the board was at one of the meetings that I think they were talking about marketing and how we could help market the organization. And one of the guys said that the tip that he had was to, wherever you go, introduce yourself as a group psychotherapist. So if you're on the plane and somebody says to you, what do you do? I'm a group psychotherapist. Oh, really? What's that? And it really is a very powerful tool. So I encourage people to do that. And then the other one is visibility makes your message available to those who will benefit from what you have to offer. So that's why being visible is important. And expertise, figure out what your niche is. You know, what kind of people do you work well with and enjoy? Because that's going to bring the best out in you and the best out in them. We can't all be, you know, specialists in trauma and or death and dying. That's got to be, you know, people that are there at that point in their lives, and looking at that and acknowledging it, just saying, okay, that's not for me. You know, I worked with, I guess actually one of my first chapter was in a book about dealing with AIDS during the beginning of AIDS at that time. And, you know, at that time, I was all in when somebody had AIDS. I was at the hospital, I was involved with the family, I was all in. And after a time, I just said, okay, so I'm going on hiatus from terminal illness. So I do chronic medical illness groups, but I don't mix people with terminal illness. And I have a source of people I refer to for that, who are really good at it. So it's knowing who's good in your community that you can refer to that's really valuable. And then cross-referring. And a lot of cross-fertilization goes on when you have these different groups, when you're meeting with people that are in different worlds. So for those of you that want to teach, write, publish, a couple of things to consider, and this is all in the hand, most of this is in the handout, but consider either Toastmasters, because that's free. Toastmasters is great for building confidence and stage presence and learning how to really do a pithy little pitch, all of those things. It's excellent at that. And then the National Speakers Association is all over the country. They have chapters in every state, and you don't have to be a member. You can go as a guest. You don't have to be invited, and you can pay the $25 to go and do it. So for those of you that are interested, I would suggest find out and you can also go to the national one too, but the local ones will be more relevant to you, like Arizona, just as an example, and see, you know, who the speakers are that are coming up and what the topic is. And then go to the ones that interest you, and the ones that don't interest you, just skip, right? So there's that. And then the other idea is mastermind groups. How many of you are familiar with mastermind groups? So it's from the business world, and most people are not familiar with mastermind groups, and they're wonderful. So the idea of a mastermind group is people that are experts in a particular area in the business world, that's where it came from, is my understanding, would gather like once a month and support each other and brainstorm ideas. And the ideal was to have people at different levels. So you get that cross-fertilization. I create, this is an example. A couple of years back, I've been looking for a mastermind group that I wanted to be part of. And so I was been in a mastermind group with a woman that's a dominatrix and a professional speaker, and a woman that is a teacher of writing to business people, and another person. And the conversations are amazing because they all have different skill sets. And the purpose is to support each other in, you know, saying it with each meeting, what your goal is, what you want to accomplish. So it's very different from a therapy group. I go into more detail in this in my book about the mastermind groups and how they do it, but it's a wonderful tool for supporting each other, right? And getting sort of brainstorming ideas about, oh, you have this idea of a project. If I had had that when I came up with the idea of the professional will, because when I did that was when my mother was dying, and I looked into the research on it and nobody was doing anything on it. There was one person that had a one-page thing about the therapist's professional will. Most people don't know what that is. Therapist professional will is a system to take care of your practice in the event of your absence, temporary or permanent. Okay, so it's best to do it when you're young and to have it updated every year. And the system I have that I teach is, it's a 6-hour law and ethics course. And now that's why I'm doing the book, because I don't want to be traveling all over the country and the world with it anymore. But the idea is to have a team of people that are your backup team. So if you lose your voice, I lose my voice once a year. That's just what happens to me. So I would call my backup person, who's the lead therapist. We call him the bridge therapist. I would call Jeff, and Jeff would call my patient and say, she can't do it. Otherwise, what would happen is I would call up with my croaky voice, and that's what I do now pretty much. I call up with my croaky voice, and now my patients know so well. They say, oh, don't talk. We'll see you next week, because it happens every year, right? And I do long-term work also, keep that in mind, right? So the system is to take care of yourself and your practice in the event of your absence. And most people don't realize that when you renew for CAMFT, LCSWs, psychologists, psychiatrists, every single one of them says, I agree to abide by the ethics, and you sign that in order to renew. The ethics requirement for every guild requires that you have the equivalent of a professional will. So it's an ethical requirement that most people are not taught about in graduate school. And for those of you that are new to practice, I strongly encourage you to go to meet people that are older. So what I love when I do, like I've got a workshop coming up. So I told them, I really want you to pitch this to new career people, because what helps is to connect the new career people with the people like me that are beginning to look at winding down and are looking for people that can take over their practice. And the young people are looking for people to build their practices with. So it's a perfect match. And for any of you that are in graduate, in training programs, I'd love to talk to you, because I'm trying to get this as built into the graduate school training. Because if we had learned to do that when we were learning to do office policies, we'd be doing it, right? We'd understand why, but now it's harder to do later. So that's one of my little hobby horses. So there's that. And then the whole idea of lifelong learning is if we view ourselves as no matter what age we are, we can benefit from learning from other people, different cultures, different traditions. It's just a world out there. And looking at it that way and connecting with clinicians from different worlds enriches our worlds and makes our work richer. So visibility, I'm going to talk about that, and then I think we almost have time for slowing down to slides. But I just remembered something that Suzanne said last at the last, the first one that you did. She said when she always said yes when she took pro bono work. And I think that's really important. And then she also said she's always looking for something that excites me. And boy, I think if we hold on to that, when you're looking for where can you build your practice, where can you expand, have that be a criteria that excites you, because that's where the juice is, and that'll maintain you. So, and I can tell you as a writer, there's a lot of tedium, and if you're not jazzed about the end result, you're not going to finish it. The book is just going to languish. So visibility. So take yourself seriously. And that means in your office, having your office be serious to a certain degree. Like you have to have, like Karen has, have your degrees shown. That helps people feel like they're brought back into your office, for one thing. And there are all kinds of benefits of doing that. So Sandra Clark, and I have her on the handout, is a LinkedIn specialist. So she's created herself a niche, right? And a lot of these people like Sandra Clark provide a mailing that you can sign up and be on their mailing list, and you'll get hit a lot for buying things, but you just ignore that. And you get their free tips. And these are some of them that are just great. So she said, do you stand out from the crowd on LinkedIn? Are you top of the profile? Do you have 2 to 3 seconds to communicate your message and your professional brand? That includes your picture, your name, and your professional headline. So the top of profile has that. This is in the handout, so you don't have to write it down. And your headshot should be no more than 2 or 3 years old and should be easily recognizable as you. I'm a fan of having a professional photographer. I have the gal who does mine. I have it done every 2 years. And if any of you want her name, she's said she'd give a discount to anybody that I've recommended. And she's doing some of them online now. And she also worked with me online to make my Zoom presence better so that the lighting, so I have an enormous radio and TV personalities ring light on behind my monitor. And she was the one who told me to get that. And it helps with the lighting, and those of us with glasses, it reduces the glare and this and that. So getting somebody like that is good. And then I have, if people are interested, I can add that. I worked with a gal, an ergonomic consultant, about how to do Zoom and minimize the damage to my body, as well as, so first I did the photographer's advice, and then it was the ergonomic, and she's got a whole website with all kinds of free assessments. Actually, this stuff is all on my website. The photographer's discount is not, that we have to do between us with her name, but so there's that. And the headshot, really important to have a good quality headshot. And especially for younger people, they look for a picture. They really want to see a picture of what you look like. And now that they can't come see you in person, it's just that they really want a picture. And then what does your headline say about you? It might or might not include your actual job title, but there should be just the default. Don't just have the default job title and company name, she says. Make it catchy. So for us, it would be group psychotherapist, right? In your LinkedIn profile. And believe me, I probably haven't done that myself. And then the first 3 lines of your summary, does it show that, unless people click to see more, the top 3 lines, just like with websites, they talk, have you heard about below the fold? So on a website, people only look at the top before they have to scroll. So your most important stuff needs to be up there. And I had to do a deep dive on this because when I started my first website, I have one for therapists and one for the public, because the one for the therapist has the professional will, and I don't want patients worrying about their therapist dying. So I created an entirely separate one for therapists. And that goes into a deeper dive on certain things. So the website is actually 88 pages. But if you look at my website, you'll see it doesn't look like that because of the way it's set up. So what's interesting in terms of what you share on your website, how out are you about private things? And in your practice, the same thing, like what do you share? And what's remarkable is that if people, I've had some people really read my website or have as, either before or after being with me. So some of them know that I used to be in a wheelchair, and some of them don't because they never looked at my website. They didn't. And what's interesting in groups is how much information do they want? And it's rare that the group all agrees that they want the same amount of information about your personal life, in terms of the detailed stuff, other than your persona or your specialty or how you describe your identity and how you're, placing yourself in the world. So that's all, what's going to motivate people to see more about you is what you do in the LinkedIn. And, just things like the AGPA's website needs a lot of help, and we're working on it. The health and medical issues SIG, we've really been on them about it. We got them to get the closed captioning this year. So I don't know if people noticed that, but I would encourage you in the feedback. Yes, we got it. Right? And what the SIG worked on is a 3-page document about access. And there's a link for that in the handout. And I'm going to encourage all of you to look at it. It's got details I didn't know. So when I created my websites, I knew I wanted it to be ADA compliant because of my population. Okay. But there are things like making sure that somebody with low vision can read your tagline underneath your signature. Don't have it pale. Have it be as, high contrast as can be. And tips like that. And I didn't used to know what sans serif is, but you don't want the squiggly stuff on letters. Make it easy to read. Like Arial is really clean and easy to read for low vision. And it's not just low vision. If you have people that are dealing with aging or medical issues, they may have vision issues or fatigue. And now with Zoom, we've got people with more fatigue. So you want to make things easy to read. So a lot of those tips are going to fit for your websites and your communications. Undervaluing our services and the personal value in relationship leads us to have anxiety about asking for what's appropriate. So that's for my best friend, Joanne Lemater, who wrote the book about Beyond Rage, coping with chronic conditions. And, she was saying, especially if you don't have role models, a mentor, consultation, support group, more and more with Zoom, we're isolated. So forming different creative ways of having support is going to be really important for us so that we're taking care of ourselves in doing that. And then the other thing I wanted to be sure to mention was another colleague of mine that I met through the National Speakers Association created a system. She's a professional organizer. And she ended up going into a lot of people's houses when a relative had passed away and helping them clear out. And then also started getting referrals for clutterers and people who lived in chaos and working with that. And she ended up creating a document that's very much like my professional will that's called exitstageright.com. And I'm going to put that one in the chat just right now. Oops, the chat's been active. I haven't seen it. So I'll put this in here. And it's on the handout. But the reason I wanted to put that in there right now is that what she's decided to do is she's retiring and she's making her materials free and asking people to make a donation to an organization of their choice, which I think is really cool. So, and they're great. It's a whole packet for how to organize information about, medical information and things like that about family members. So check that out. And again, for family members. And so that's really the main gist of the stuff I wanted to say, but the circle of collaboration and support, I think, is really the main message that I wanted to sort of end with, and saying that it takes a village for us to get to the places we've gotten to. Oh, the other thing I will say though is that the way my books came about, because people had asked me about that, is that I was doing workshops and giving handouts. And then I started having more and more handouts and giving them away. And somebody finally said, this is a book. So I first self-published. And then I did my workshop at AGPA, and the bookseller at AGPA said, your book is a bestseller here. And I'm like, what? This is this little self-published thing. So then I screwed up my courage, and I had some buddies at AGPA that pumped me up and said, what do you have to lose? So then I took myself over to the Routledge booth, and I said, is there any possibility that if I let you see this book that you might consider introducing me to one of your agents or one of the editors? And they looked at it, and there's a process with the proposal, and they took my first book, then they took my second book. And you don't get anywhere if you don't take that risk. So on that note, I will say thank you for your kind attention, and see what questions people have, or Michelle, if you have anything, or Carmen.
I think one of the things that's on my mind right now is I'm feeling so much demand from so many people, like the waiting list that already exists. And so I think a part of me is like, what if I market myself too well? Like being able to say no and set boundaries there, yes. Because I feel like it accidentally happened. They're here and there's so much need.
So I have one sort of off the wall thought for group therapists. And that is, some of you know Elaine Cooper-Lonergan. When she was at UC, she started a waiting list group. So for those of you in agencies where you have too many people, it can really help to have a waiting list group that's like a holding place, and it lets the therapist get an assessment of people. And it's something that some of us group therapists might consider doing for people if there are enough similarities. I'm hearing what you're talking about, Carmen. I'm drowning with it. I'm getting 3 referrals a week. And my policy has always been, and it's getting expensive now, to help find people therapists. And I'm continuing to do that. And that's part of why I'm on exhaust, because by accident, a bunch of students from a graduate school got, wanted me to, thought I was offering a group for graduate students, and it's not, it's just for licensed therapists. So I found group leaders for them. And I've set that all up, but it comes back. So you do what you can. And the setting, that setting no, like figuring out who can you afford to work with right now. And then when you're looking to expand your practice, that's a different thing. But right now, is there anybody that wants to, if you just nod or not, shake your head, to anybody having trouble with expanding their practice right now? So I think for the majority of us, we're inundated. And the key, I think, during this time is to network and find out who we respect and trust that's within our state, because it doesn't have to be local anymore. And that helps to be able to refer people. And, I'm still doing what I've always done, which is I call to make sure, do you have any openings? Because so many people are not, I'm the average, most people that are calling me are telling me that they called 10 therapists and none of them called them back. And I was the only one that did. And that's just my value system. That's where I'm willing to put my energy. Some people can't afford that. But for women, it's even harder to say no. So we need to feel free to say no. The way I manage it is I say, no, I'm sorry, I can't, but here's a suggestion. And there are clinics and agencies. And for somebody, if you run across somebody in your community that's new to practice, they could set up a practice right now just for referring people. Right? Wouldn't it be great to have Susie Q down the block that you could just say, she's handling referrals? Because all the clinics that I know here in Northern California are full. They don't know where to send people. So we have our profession has a crisis, and there are, if you have time, you can create new groups out of that for people in those categories. So that's one way to deal with it. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think that's a great point. I love this waiting list group idea of finding a way to meet them already.
Yeah.
Because what do I do when they're already here? I think that's just a really challenging thing. And I think one of the other things that I'm sure is, I guess my assumption is that it's especially endemic to women, is guilt for leaving the agency and going into private practice. I hear you mention, and I love the idea of marketing your expertise, raising your rates. And I feel so much guilt if I were to even think about leaving my agency. And I think that's probably common, but it's just one of those things as I think about marketing, like, that factor.
I think it's very common, and it's harder for women. And I know for myself, the way I did it is when I left my postdoc fellowship, they allowed us to take people with us if we didn't increase the fee. So I started out with a small practice with people that were low fee. And that was great, So it in terms of the guilt, for me, one way to handle that is to always have some low fee slots. And it's also my ethical, moral commitment to community is to always have that, and to do whatever amount of pro bono I can afford at that time. And I think that you have to figure that out and almost literally budget it. And then think about how much you can afford to stay at an agency when you're not happy. What's it costing you? And can you negotiate to be there part-time? And what can you do to take care of yourself? And I'm speaking to you specifically, but I think it's generalizable, right? Is that all of us, if you don't go direct into private practice, it's a rough road to get those bumps and those hurdles into creating, a practice that you feel is yours and you're comfortable with. Yeah. So I have not been looking at the chat, so I'm going to have you guys help me with that.
Not a problem. There is one comment here by Elizabeth that says, I have no online presence whatsoever, and I'm going to transition from the Bureau of Prisons to some other undetermined career in the next 5 years. I heard you mention LinkedIn. Should I start there? I worry that inmates and their families will track me down if I'm online. So I've avoided it. I'm not allowed to have contact with them.
Great. Oh, that's fabulous. And so again, I told people this was going to be like, up close and personal, that I was going to share stuff that I really don't often. But I had a stalker that was a former patient. So when I started looking at becoming, that I was told I had to become visible, I was scared to death because I had worked so hard to keep private, and I still work really, really hard to keep my address private. It's a losing battle at this point. So looking at your safety and security, and again, this is largely a women's issue. So I'm so glad Elizabeth raised this. There are ways, and I think I would actually email Sandra Clark and ask her about this, the privacy thing. Because it's a simple question. Can you just do LinkedIn and only have a little bit of information about yourself? I'm quite sure you can. I'm not an expert on it, but I would just have, so I'm going to jump ahead of myself on that. So I have they say for authors, you have to have a Facebook page. And that scared the daylights out of me because that, and I was like, okay, but you can have a public Facebook page that shares no information, that only puts a little bit on it. So I have a public Facebook page. And Elizabeth, you could consider doing that and keep it very separate from the other thing. But yeah, our security is very, very important, and our privacy is really important. And sadly, with what's going on in the world, I think it's going to become even more important. So when you think about becoming visible, think about what you would be okay having out there about you in 10 years. That's what they say the young people are not doing, is that they're showing, crazy pictures of themselves and not realizing that when their next employer after college looks, they're going to find that and sort of go, oh, well, maybe not, So the content needs to be information. And with somebody like Elizabeth, it would be, you can say that you worked in whatever a generic is for the prison system. I wouldn't say the particular prison, but again, that would be a sort of doing a deeper dive on that. Do other people have concerns about how much information you share out in the World Wide Web, right? So I'll give you an example on the professional will that I talk about when I teach that. I was asked to do an article about the professional will about 30 years ago, before I understood the internet. So I did an article for a therapist magazine, and it was my understanding only therapists would ever see it. I then got an email from somebody saying that they had read my article and their therapist had just died. What should she do? And I was like, oh my goodness, they found that article. So we have to, anything we put out, we have to be really clear that we're okay with that. And so it would be a very professional photo, and only that for any security concerns. I think that's the best I can do for a short answer on that. Was it, Elizabeth, can we unmute you to see if that addresses it adequately?
That was great. Thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Okay, good. Okay. All right, what looks like you had another one. Rochelle, was there another one that you were suggesting?
We were actually putting in hearts for some of the gems that you shared in the chat, so that will be captured. So we want to invite some of our participants that are here. If anything kind of struck a chord, or if there are questions, we want to invite you to be part of this conversation. I know some of you put comments in the chat, so we'd like to open it up.
Oh, I was just wondering if we're going to get that handout, Anne, or if it was already in the chat, or.
So I'm going to let Carmen address that. You're muted.
Oh, I was like, I know how to do this. So actually, I didn't know that it was perhaps the wrong handout until I knew what your presentation was. I have the accessibility document only. And so, yeah, what I will do is I'm writing down the names of the participants who are here. And so if you actually wanted to throw in your email address into the chat, I'll be happy to get that. For those of you who are joining us later, we will have that available on the YouTube link. So for right now, those who are present, go ahead and throw your email address into the chat and we will make sure that you get a copy of that. Thanks for asking, Karen.
Yeah.
Also for me, and it is because in late life, I learned that I'm neurodivergent, but it is about saying no to things because everything looks so wonderful and great. And I've been, when you were talking about like saying yes to different things, I removed myself from the DEI task force. I've removed myself from a lot of the different types of, professional work that I've done. And it has been so helpful.
So the other thing I would add to that is that all of what she just described was pro bono work she's been doing.
Yeah.
And we need to really, especially as women, be thinking about, as AGPA, there's nothing paid. So it's a wonderful organization, but can you afford to do more than, what can you afford to donate of your time? And think ahead of that. And then when it feels like, as Karen did, it's not wise to continue doing this. You say no. And you say, it's an honor. Thank you. And,
Yeah.
we have to take care of ourselves. And that's really the bottom line. Yeah.
So
I
there is
appreciate, sorry, Rochelle.
no, I was going to follow up. There is a comment that asks, since we read your bio, and so just for our audience, we really are intentional about reading the bios, about highlighting the experiences of our speakers. Oftentimes as women, we don't really celebrate ourselves or our success to that magnitude. So one of the things that we've been really intentional about here is really highlighting that. And with that, there's a comment by Elizabeth about if you can speak a little bit about becoming a fellow AGPA. And then I'll turn it over to you, Carmen.
Oh, I don't know if you want to go from there, Dr. Steiner, before. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant for her to answer. Okay, wasn't sure. Sorry. So my understanding of fellowship is that it's a way of acknowledging people that have donated a lot of their time to their local affiliate or to AGPA, or made major contributions to the field. And they're changing the criteria because it ended up looking very elitist. And what do you mean looking? So, and also people weren't being tapped who had already contributed a lot. So, and the assumption, bad assumption with a lot of structural racism built into it, was that you would look out for it, right? As opposed to, the reality that often people get tapped and encouraged to do certain roles in AGPA and in other organizations. So as women, part of what we need to do is to say, I'm interested in leadership. And speak up and say and talk to what kind of leadership you want to do. If you want to present, submit proposals and do that. If you want to do a kind of work, then see if you can get a mentor, look for a consultation group. And in terms of fellowship, the criteria are being revised as I understand it. The DEI has been really barking about this. and wanting it to be much more transparent what the process is, and make it possible for people to, I mean, it's always been possible. That's what's sad about it. It's always, you could always nominate yourself for fellowship, but why would you do that if you don't feel like you have support for it, or people aren't encouraging you to do that? And that's where, you know, I like to really encourage people that have, you know, done a lot of work to put that, you know, to do that, and to encourage and write, you know, letters of recommendation for whatever they might want to do. And those of us in my kind of role need to do a lot more of that when we've been in leadership, is to really, you know, find out who's interested in moving in which directions and encourage them to do that. That I see as our, you know, our moral imperative and a responsibility. And also a way of giving back in a way that feeds and expands the world of AGPA. So again, did that address your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. And so I encourage everybody to look into fellowship. It's tedious, and you have to, you know, it's like when you apply for a job, you have to ask for recommendations. And for women, that tends to be harder. But people like what, you know, and most people that do it all the time, like me, I just say, okay, so what do you want me to say? And I have you write a draft, and then I'm not going to rubber stamp anything. I'm going to put it in my own words, but I want to know, what does that job want from you? And then I'll work with that. And so that makes it easier, is if you're looking for recommendations, to tell people if it would help. You know, some people don't want that, but everybody I know, that's what they want. Make it easier for me. And you know, what all your accomplishments are, so that I can put them in my language and use my way of presenting it and what I think is important to emphasize. So that's true for recommendations of all sorts.
I think one of the things that I'm noticing, the idea, it's, as everything is, so subjective. So I remember earlier you mentioning, like, we don't need to be a jack of all trades to become an expert in something. And it's one of those things, I think, similar to, like, when have I done enough to become a fellow? When have I done enough to become an expert? And I think that women are far more likely to ask ourselves these questions. When do we have enough for a 10-year promotion? When do we have these types of things? And I'm just curious if you've got thoughts on what the enough is for us.
So I, you know, when I hear that, every time, all I think of is, please find women in those different areas that you can ask. What else do I need to do to be an expert? Do you think I need to take any more training, or do you think I have enough? Do you think I'm ready to present on this? Or should I do a one-day workshop at the local affiliate and wait for the feedback? Where do you think I am? And we all really need that reality check and support from other women that we respect. So one of the lovely things about what the culture you all have created in the Women's SIG that's been going on for years is, with the large lunch, with a lot of people, you can meet a lot of people. And then, you know, you could raise your hand and say, I'm looking for a mentor who could help me with doing X. And you're doing that with ease. So I don't know if that gives you some ideas, but I think really, you know, finding a couple of mentors, and that's true for our patients too. You know, I've got somebody in the tech world. I said, can you get a mentor? And my goodness, she's just flown since she got that mentor, you know, because that mentor knows that world, and she's cute. And so she's not taken seriously, and but they've got her tracked for leadership because she's got it. You know, talking about systems people, she gets systems, but because she's cute, she's not seen. Now she's seen because she's using her voice.
I know we are near and at our time boundary, but is there anything else before we wrap up tonight? Either Dr. Steiner, from you or from our audience members, any final words before we wrap up for this evening?
I love that purple background.
Okay, so I have to tell you, when we used the thing, to me that was audacious. I got my my house remodeled finally. And the world I come from, you don't. You have a white background. You
How
don't let
boring.
you don't let any part of your personality come out, right? And I'm loving it. So for me, that's actually, I think that that's a great tie-in, because for me, that to me, letting that part of me be seen is audacious, coming from the world that I come from,
Yeah.
is to let them see that I like to have bright things around and some flowers, and
Yeah.
that's a bit of me without imposing.
Well, and I love it. And I'm at my work at my counseling center office right now, but my home office much more shows me. And that's just coincidental that those things are there. That wall just happened to be where they fit. Thank you so much. And thanks to Carmen and Rochelle for organizing this. And yeah, this is valuable to me.
Good. It's a great group. So I have a favor to ask of Rochelle. Do you remember the tagline on your signature? The quote?
Let's see, I'm going to pull it up. So I've got
Great.
a
And if
couple
you
of
would
different
read it.
ones. Absolutely. I'm pretty sure I know what you're referring to. All right, so pulling it up now.
Obviously, this was unrehearsed. That's the beauty of having a conversation, which is what we've done tonight. I really appreciate
So which tag, which one? Is it how I close my emails or the quotes?
I think it's the quote, but let's do them both.
That's all right. Let me pull it up from the iPad. All right. So one of the I typically close my emails with thank you and be well.
Mhm.
And I've got, let's see if it's in here.
It's in the signature line.
All right. So ladies and gentlemen, indeed, this was not rehearsed. So one of the tag, and I'm not sure if this one is it, so I'll have to go to the other email, but one of it says, what you speak is what you become. It can change your life. And what Anne is referring to is this tagline by Audrey Hepburn: nothing is impossible. The word itself says I'm possible.
That's what I thought would be a lovely place to end.
That's
Well,
beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for making yourself available this evening, for being part of the speaker series. And we thank those of you that are here with us this evening as well for your contribution, for your engagement. And for those of you who will be watching this, we thank you as well for taking the time to review and look at ways that we can really appreciate and market ourselves and honor the hard work and effort that we've put into our respective journeys. So thank you, and we wish you a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Yes. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Wonderful group.